Good morning, brothers and sisters. I'm very happy to be back at Satya Alam, Sambodhi. This is always one of my favorite places to be. And every year I like to follow on the trips. So this year we look forward to Vietnam. Okay. Today's topic is Sammā Vāyāma. Sammā Vāyāma is one of the elements of the Eightfold Way, one of the ways in the Eightfold Ways. This is actually the beginning of the meditation, because the Eightfold Way is made into three parts, which I will explain in a moment. And the third part is on meditation, and this is the beginning of the meditation. This is a very important teaching because this lays the foundation to how we can practice meditation successfully. And there are some very important teachings in here which we need to clarify, because a lot of people get distracted by many different people telling different versions of it. But here I'm drawing it directly from the Buddhist teaching, so there are a few things we need to clarify. Sammā Vāyāma is often translated as right effort, and that's a good translation. But my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji, pointed out that a more accurate explanation of the meaning of the word Vāyāma means exercise. Why exercise? You see, effort and exercise are slightly two different things. When you talk about effort, you're trying to do something, and that's it. When you talk about exercise, you're no longer just trying to do something. You are now trying to accomplish a goal. Why do people exercise? It's not because they love the exercise, well, some people do. But very often people exercise because they have a certain goal in mind. And many people exercise because they want to lose weight. Some people want to stay healthy. Some people enjoy the companionship of other friends who are doing the same exercises. So there's always an overriding goal as to why we do an exercise, not just an effort. An effort is something you do, but there is not much more that happens after that in terms of follow-up, in terms of accomplishing goal. So exercise is a more accurate explanation of the word Vāyāma. And then the word Sammā. Now, very often you read everywhere the word Sammā is translated as right. It's a good word to use, but my teacher pointed out the real meaning of Sammā comes from the root word Sam. Sam simply means together. So Sammā simply means going, flowing together, and that is harmonious, harmony with the self, harmony with the world. So that's why he calls it harmonious exercises. The harmony here is the opposite of the meaning conflict. So therefore, Sammā really means in harmony, opposite from conflict. And this is why a lot of people easily translate that as right versus wrong. One thing I would also like to point out, there are a few words we have to be a little careful when we say something is right, which means something else which is not according to that must be wrong. Because right is a very judgmental term. So it's good to say harmonious, that it is in harmony. And this harmonious exercise is made of 4 parts, and that's why it's called Cattari Sammapadana. Padana is really a kind of striving, really putting in all your effort to make it happen. That could also be the reason why they call it right effort. It is putting in a lot of effort to make things happen, achieving a goal. So here, Cattari means 4. Sammā is harmonious. Padana is that series of exercises. So Cattari Sammā Padana simply means the 4 harmonious exercises, which we're going to look into. This is a very important part of the teaching, because this is the part of the teaching that really teaches you how to purify the mind. So when we talk about meditation, many people say, oh, okay, we begin with anapanasati. And that is correct. That is exactly stated in the sutra. We begin with anapanasati. But when you talk about just anapanasati, observing the process of breathing, it does not adequately purify the mind. But the 4 exercises here will help you purify the mind while practicing anapanasati. So in other words, it's actually when you begin to practice anapanasati, you apply this 4 harmonious exercises, and then you can purify the mind. One of the things I always like to do when we talk about the Buddha's teaching, we always go back to the very root of the teaching, because the original doctrine of the Buddha, the thing which the Buddha stresses everyone must learn, that is the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths actually was spoken very well by the Buddha in his very first sermon. So when he first became enlightened, he went on and met up with the 5 ascetics a couple of months after he became enlightened, and that was when he began to talk about the Four Noble Truths. And that's when he set into motion the wheel of Dharma. And this first sermon is called the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra. It is very important to learn this sutra. Now, if you were to think about, okay, I want to learn the proper teachings of the Buddha, which is the first sutra I should learn? This should be one of the very first sutra you should learn, because this is where the Buddha explained the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So first he spoke about there are 4 Noble Truths, and he used the word dukkha. Now very often dukkha is translated as suffering. So that's why people say, oh, Buddhism is so negative, always talking about suffering. But that is not the real situation. Now, just think about this situation. If you were sick, what do? You go and see a doctor, right? When you see a doctor, the doctor diagnoses your illness, and then he gives you medicine. What does the medicine do to you? Helps you heal, and then you are not sick anymore. So the doctor is giving you medicine to heal you. Now, can you say the doctor's job is all about sickness? No. The doctor's job is all about healing you from sickness. That's what the doctor is doing. In the same way, the Buddha is the doctor. The Buddha was the doctor, and he provided Dharma. Dharma is the medicine, and this is to heal us from the suffering. So if you think about it, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the triple gem, is not about suffering. It is about healing from suffering, freedom from suffering. For the same reason, you don't think negatively of the doctor. When we think about a doctor, we think positively, because he heals us from suffering, or rather he heals us from sickness. So now it is important to reorientate your thinking and realize the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha is not about suffering, but it is about freedom from suffering, healing from suffering. So the Buddha pointed out, first, there is dukkha. Now, dukkha is often translated as suffering, but actually dukkha can mean many different levels of so-called suffering, because there is also a very invisible level that all of us are not aware of, and that is called stress. Whenever we get stressed, that is dukkha. Our muscles are all tensed up, and then we get excited. That is dukkha. And therefore, dukkha is not just about suffering like as though somebody died, or suffering like you have a severe illness lying in the hospital bed. Not that level of suffering. It could be simply you are angry, you are frustrated, you are unhappy, you are crying, you're feeling sorrowful. That is dukkha. So the Buddha pointed out that all of us experience dukkha, and we don't realize it sometimes. It's any time of the day. The next thing is that the Buddha pointed out that there is a cause of dukkha, and then dukkha can be brought to an end, and there is an ending to dukkha. And how do we end the dukkha? The Fourth Noble Truth points out that there is a way leading to the ending of the dukkha, and this is the Sublime Eightfold Way, or some people call the Noble Eightfold Path. I prefer to use the word way rather than path. You know, path, you're talking about the road. The way, you're talking about traversing the journey. The way to Penang, let's say you want to go to Penang. The way to Penang is to take this, and then you drive this at this speed within the speed limit, and so on. So that is the way, the doing of traversing the path, not just the path itself. We're not talking about the road. So the Eightfold Path is not just talking about, oh, there are these eightfold things. It is the way, the practice. So the way is really the practice. So now, in a nutshell, if we were to say, what did the Buddha teach? Basically, there are 2 things about becoming a Buddhist. First, the doctrine. Then, the practice. The doctrine, the Four Noble Truths. That's the doctrine of the Buddha. Everything the Buddha spoke about comes under the Four Noble Truths. That is the doctrine of the Buddha. How do we practice? The Sublime Eightfold Way, or the Noble Eightfold Way. That is how we practice. So the Eightfold Way is the practice of the Buddhists. Right? So let's take a look at very quickly these Four Noble Truths. The first Noble Truth, the Buddha pointed out that there is suffering. There are four kinds of suffering. There are 8 kinds of suffering, or 8 conditions of suffering. The first 4 are very straightforward: birth, aging, sickness, and death. It's quite easy for us to understand that. But the next one is separation from what is pleasing is suffering, which means we've had experienced something good, now we no longer have it. That is suffering. Now this can refer to objects like your cell phone. What happens when you lose your cell phone? Isn't that suffering? Yeah. It could also refer to situations. You have a job. What happens if your company closed down and retrench you if you're an employee? Right? So that is suffering. Or it could be about a relationship with someone. So husband and wife relationship. What happens if it breaks up and people divorce? That is suffering. Or it could be a person, your elderly grandmother, grandfather, or your elderly parents, and so on. What happens if they pass away? That is suffering. So when losing something that you have experienced to be good, enjoyable, pleasant, comforting, now you no longer have it, that is suffering. The next one is union with what is displeasing, which means you're stuck with something you don't want. You want to avoid. Let's say you get sick. Now you're sick for the rest of the day. Isn't that suffering? You're stuck with something you don't want. Sickness is something you don't want. So being stuck with something unpleasant. And this can also refer to property, can refer to relationships, can refer to situations, can refer to people. For example, you have no choice. You work for a company and your boss is a lousy boss. He does not appreciate you. Every time you do something good, he never praise you at all. Every time you do something not according to the way he wants, he scolds you. Now you have no choice, because maybe that company pays you a good salary and you find it difficult to change job. So you're stuck with that kind of a boss. Right? So this is another example of union with what is displeasing is suffering. It could also be a next door neighbor, which I have experienced, who may throw rubbish in your backyard all the time. And I have experienced that, So that is suffering, because you can't get rid of the neighbor so easily unless you move to another place. Okay, you move to a new development somewhere in Setia Alam or Shah Alam or Bukit Raja. It's an empty lot next door, and the next minute the new neighbor that comes to move next to you is the one that was your old neighbor. Now you're stuck with something unpleasant again, So that is suffering. That is number 6. Number 7 is not to get what one wants. So we have wishes, we have desires. We don't get it, we are unhappy. We wish to get a good pay rise, end of the year, it didn't happen. Young men wish to find a good wife. He's been searching for years and never came across somebody who likes him for whatever reason. And then that is suffering, right? Not to get what one wants. And of course, it is the last one, number 8, which is the root of all our suffering. And this is really where meditation comes in. Meditation will help us purify number 8, basically. Of course, it does the first 7, but it is the number 8 which is really the core of all our suffering. In brief, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging. Now, 5 aggregates is the teaching of the Buddha, referring to how when light enters the eyes, we begin to see something. When sound enters the ear, we begin to hear something. This is called the 5 aggregates. The arising of sensation, sanya, and then there's a feeling associated with it, vedana, and then from there the mind begins to construct, that is sankhara, construction, and then we begin to have a big picture of what we have seen, heard, smelled, taste and touch, that is vijnana. And then we have this mental image, the rupa. Now the mind is aware of an object. Now, if we are just aware of objects and we don't react to it, that's fine. But very often we cannot do that. We react and we begin to cling on to something pleasant, or we want to push away something unpleasant. So this clinging on to these 5 aggregate brings us a lot more suffering. Right? So these are the 8 conditions of suffering. At this point, it is important to talk about how that comes to be. Why is it that we suffer? So it is all about the mind. It is really not about what happens out there. It is the way you perceive what happens out there. It's the way you respond to what happens out there. If you have a nasty boss who scolds you, and you are a very sensitive person, every time somebody says something negative to you, you react. That is suffering. But if you are like me, in that sense, always very creative. When somebody scolds me, I just imagine this is a gorilla that escaped from the zoo. No problem. He can be screaming his head off and there he goes again. This gorilla is screaming again. I had such a boss once. That's many years ago. Early morning, I go to the office. I always go very early, and sometimes he's earlier than me. The moment I see him, the first thing I say to him is, "Good morning, sir." Next minute, then I say, "How are you, sir?" Next minute, he says to me, "What's so good about this morning?" So I don't react to that. Imagine if you try to be nice to someone, "Good morning, sir," and he says, "What's so good about this morning?" I just imagine, the radio is just turned on, repeating itself. The tape recorder is repeating itself. Then I don't feel anything about it. And then he asked me, "Why do you want to know how I'm feeling?" I said, "How are you, sir? Why do you want to know how I am?" That kind of people. And the way you react to that, in Cantonese, "Tong Hei Chao," "Tong Hei Mo Do," like he never arrived. Just let it go. And then you won't suffer. You see, it's the way your mind reacts to what happens. It is not what happens that hurt you. The way your mind reacts to what happened hurts you even more. And Buddha calls it self-affliction of mental suffering. Mental suffering, self-affliction. We cause it to ourselves, the way we react. So to understand that, we need to have a basic understanding of the mind. The mind is really an activity, and it is made of 3 parts, the Buddha pointed out. Amazingly, today modern scientists are trying to analyze the brain, thinking that the brain is the mind, but actually the brain itself is just an organ. The brain is not the mind. The activity of the brain is what we call consciousness, and that is often referred to as the mind. Right? Because these words are big words. They mean many things. Mind is a big word. Consciousness is a big word. But basically, the consciousness, the awareness of your environment, awareness of experiences internally and externally, that awareness is consciousness. You are conscious of your environment. So that is the mind. So the mind is really an activity. And the activity can only be experienced. Activity is not something you can hold. It's not like this. You can hold on to it, you can touch it, you can feel it. Your mind, you cannot touch it. You cannot feel it. You cannot grasp it because it has no form. The mind is formless. So the Buddha pointed out there are 3 mental experiences that are happening all the time. The first one he calls vijnana. Vijnana is referring to the arising of the 5 aggregates, the panchakanda. This arising of the 5 aggregates create a perception in your mind of what you have just seen, heard, smelled, tasted or touched. So this is really what was perceived through your sense organs, vijnana. So your mind now has a mental image that, I saw something, I heard something. This is the basic thing about vijnana. That's all there is. But the mind likes to interpret. And that part of the mind that interprets is called mano. This is the process of cognition, cognitive process, where we begin to cognize. Right? When you cognize means you are aware of what that object is, and that's why that word recognize comes in, or recognize. The word recognize comes from the word recognizing, because it is happening in your mind again. Not only you saw the object, now your mind is repeating it by reflecting on it and realizing what it is. So it is an interpretation. The mind begins to interpret, categorize interpretation of and giving meaning to what you have perceived. What you have perceived is called rupa. Giving a meaning to it is giving a label called nama. Right? And then there's a third part of the mind which reacts to whether something you perceive is pleasant or unpleasant, and that is called the chitta, the affective process. This affective process is commonly called emotion. Right? To keep it simple, this is your emotional mind, where it leads to a mood or a temperament. You begin to react whether that thing that you saw, it is pleasant or unpleasant. Everything we see is either pleasant or unpleasant. You know, and different people react differently. That we must be aware of. But let's take, for example, chili padi. People who love spicy food, they enjoy chili padi, right? People who cannot stand spicy food, chili padi turns them off. So that spicy sensation is pleasant to some people. It can be unpleasant to others. In the same manner, loud sounds. You know, most of us here, I think all of us here agree, we don't like loud sounds. But you know your kids at home, they love to turn on the music loud, right? So that is the reaction, tanha. But not only do we react, we cling on. Right? We personalize. Oh, I feel this. I am hurt by this. You knock your hand against the wall and say, oh, I feel the pain. That I, me, or mine arises all the time. So this is where the grasping of the mind comes in, creating the notion there is a self that is existing. Because we keep thinking about the past, the present, and the future, and then we begin to create the notion that there was a past, there is a future, and there is something happening which we call the present. And all this thinking about the past and the future and expecting changes in the present, they reinforce the identity of the self. The past is gone, it no longer exists. The future hasn't come yet, it is nowhere yet. And yet we cling on to those ideas. So these are the three parts of the mind. This is where meditation comes in. Meditation helps us purify the mind to be able to see these three things happening. That all that we are experiencing is just sensations from the environment triggering a perception. The mind tries to interpret, and this is where meditation comes in. That meditation helps us purify the mind, that we don't always interpret things according to our past. You see, all interpretations arise because of past experiences. Like I take this for example, most of us will say, oh, this object is pleasant because it quenches our thirst. Now what if there was a child, when he was a little boy, his big brother bullied him so much that every time the big brother gets angry with him, he takes one of these, shove it into his mouth and make him feel very hurt. Now, if that big brother does that to that little boy several times during his childhood, don't you think when the little boy grows up, the moment he sees this, he feels unhappy, he feels fear, because he remembers. So our interpretation comes from our memory. So this is the important thing about purifying the mind, so that we do not apply our memory of past to try to interpret everything. Because when we do that, we become self-centered. We begin to interpret things according to the way we like it. So this is the danger about interpretation, and that's where meditation comes in. Helps us to understand how we interpret, and therefore purifying that, so that when we see an object is just an object. Any interpretation is the activity of our memory, imagination, expectations. And therefore we don't apply that, because that is what brings us a lot of suffering. The memory, imagination, expectation will bring us a lot of suffering. And then at the same time, we realize that everything has a certain sensation. I mean, face it, even if you love chili, the moment you eat something very spicy with a lot of chili padi, it is something burning your tongue, and it is something unpleasant. But of course, some people enjoy that unpleasantness. So that unpleasantness is there. You cannot avoid it, right? So when you drink something, let's say you drink Coca-Cola, that somebody just shake the Coca-Cola and then you drink that bubbling thing, is also very unpleasant. It gets to your nose and it hurts you, right? So feelings are unpleasant. One of the things about meditation to help us understand that there are these unpleasant sensations, therefore we don't react to it. The reaction is tanha, emotional reaction to our excitement and arousals, right? Then that leads us to the second noble truth, the cause of suffering, or the origin of suffering. And the Buddha pointed out it is this tanha, and this is translated as craving. Now, craving is the common translation of that Pali word tanha. Craving is fine, but then craving itself does not adequately give real meaning to the word tanha. But I'll come to that in a moment. The real meaning of tanha is really emotional reaction. But let's stick to the word craving for now, because this is taken straight from the sutra based on standard common translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. So I'm just using this as it is. It is this craving that leads to renewed existence. Renewed existence is not talking about rebirth here. A lot of people misunderstand. Renewed existence is talking about rebirth. No. Renewed existence means we keep thinking about the fact that, oh, we are existing. We keep thinking about the notion of existence. So the mind is renewing the thought of existence all the time, thinking about the past, the present, and the future. Because the moment you begin to think about the past, the present, and the future, you are reinforcing the notion of existence. And this is what's happening. And when that happens, we want to escape. But we can't escape. Sometimes something is unpleasant. And how do people escape from unpleasantness? They go and find something else to do which is more pleasant. So some people go and get drunk. Some people smoke. Some people take drugs. Some people fool around. So all kinds of people do all kinds of things for delight and lust, seeking delight here and there in order to escape this feeling of unhappiness or dukkha. And what kind of reaction do we have when we experience anything? The first is craving for sensual pleasures. Something pleasant, we want it. Craving for non-existence. Something unpleasant, we want to get rid of it. We don't want it to exist. Craving for continued existence is the belief of the self-existence. I want to live on forever. Or rather, I want to live on for as long as I can. Everybody wants to live as long as we can. So that's why we always have, from our cultural background, every culture teaches us that, living to old age is a good thing. But sometimes if you think more clearly, living to an old age may not always be a good thing. It's only a good thing if, number one, you can stay healthy. Number two, that you have good family around you to help you because you can't do everything yourself anymore at your old age. Right? Number three is your family is relatively well-to-do. So if you're not able to walk around, they can provide you with an electronic wheelchair. And if you're not able to go to shopping mall and you can't climb into a car, they can afford a nice little Toyota Wellfire and can take you to the mall. So if you happen to have a family that is able to afford these things, old age is not so bad after all. But if you were not, and you came from a poor family, do you think old age is very pleasant when you're not able to walk around? You can't even afford a pair of clutches if you come from a very poor family, right? You become bedridden and stay in bed for the rest of your life. So old age is not necessarily the most wonderful thing. This is where meditation can help us. It helps us purify the mind to the point that we're able to realize these things. And this craving or the tanha, my teacher pointed out the real meaning of tanha is emotional reaction. We emotionally react to everything we experience, and there are three kinds of reaction. The first one is called lobha. Lobha is lust and greed. Why lust and greed? If it is something pleasant, it begins with lust. So if it is something pleasant, now we want it. You want to enjoy it. Your next door neighbor says, okay, tonight we're going to have a durian party. I'm going to bring in one big basket full of Musang King. Come and join me. You like it, you want it, so you go. So that is, you're lusting for Musang King. Now, if he opens the Musang King and say, okay, everybody take one, so you took one piece and you enjoyed one seed. Now, do you now say, I have now eaten one piece of Musang King. That's enough. Thank you very much. Do you say that? Oh, no. Can I have a second one? How about the third one? That's where lust turns into greed. We begin with lust. We want it. But the moment we get it, we can't stop there. We want more. That is why lust turns into greed. In the same way you run a business, your business turns over 1 million in the first year. In the second year, 20% growth, 1.2 million. Now will you say in the third year, that's enough, 1.2 million is enough, I'm not gonna want to grow it anymore, leave it be, I'm happy with 1.2 million. We're not happy with that, we want more. So that is why lust turns into greed. Then the next reaction is dosa. Dosa is aversion and hatred towards something that is unpleasant. Aversion means you want to avoid. Aversion comes from the word avoid. You want to avoid something because it's unpleasant. You want to get rid of it. Now what happens if you can't get rid of it? Then you become angry with it. Anger eventually turns to hatred. Because if you can't get rid of it, it becomes hatred. You move to this new garden and your same old next door neighbor came and moved right next to you, continue to throw rubbish in your backyard. You know, you try to avoid him, you couldn't. He ends up next door to you again and he keeps throwing the rubbish to you and you start to get angry with him. And that anger can turn into hatred to the point that you hate that person. So that is how aversion turns into hatred. And then of course the third one is this self-centered existence, moha, the delusion of self-centered existence. A lot of people translate the word moha or call the word moha ignorance. Well, ignorance is a big word. Ignorance can mean a lot of things, but the real meaning of moha is really that you have this delusion of self-centered existence. The delusion, that is really moha. To think that you exist and therefore you want to live longer. So these are the three reactions. These three reactions are really emotional reaction, and the Buddha warned us that if we're not careful with emotional reaction, it can get out of control. And in this sutra, the Chitta Sutra, now at this point I want to point out very importantly, go back to this slide here, where the mind is made of three parts, but unfortunately many translators, when they take the Pali Canyon, the Pali text, and they see the word mano, they translate it as mind. They see the word chitta, they translate it as mind. They don't differentiate. Because they don't differentiate what is mano and what is chitta, then it becomes unclear. You don't get a clear meaning of what this verse is all about. This verse is about emotions dominate the world. Emotions create distress. Emotion is that one thing to which all are spellbound, because the Buddha used the word chitta. So here the Buddha is talking about chitta. Very common, this verse is translated as mind controls everything, mind create suffering. You know, the word mind, it becomes not so clear. But if I were to explain to you, it is emotions, not just mind, emotion. The emotional part of your mind, then it becomes clearer. And in the same manner, the next verse where the Buddha said that you create your own suffering, and because if we allow emotions to get out of control, it brings us even more suffering, and that is called the self-affliction of mental suffering. And this is the Dhammapada verse where the Buddha said, whatever harm one enemy may do to another, or one hater to another, it is one's own ill-directed emotion that brings upon oneself a greater harm. In other words, if somebody doesn't like you and start to say nasty things towards you, it is not what he said that really hurts you more. It is the way you react to what he said. So when you say good morning to the boss and the boss say, what's so good about morning? And if you begin to react to that and you start to get angry, you get unhappy because you are greeting someone and yet that person reacts in a very ungrateful way and a very unwholesome way. So it's the way you react. In the same way, this is happening to me. Lately, I have not been watching my weight, or should I say I've been watching my weight grow. I have not been watching what I eat, so I was a little bit unmindful in the past couple of months since I came, last month or so, since I came back from the Philippines, and I put on a little bit of weight. And if I were to run into a friend who saw me before that, a lot slimmer, he would say to me, oh Billy, you're getting fatter. Now, when somebody says to me, Billy, you're getting fatter, if I don't react to it, then that's the end of the story. But if I were to think, oh, you're trying to hurt my feelings, huh? You think you're very skinny, you know? And then it becomes a quarrel, it becomes more hurting. It is the way you react, the way your mind directs your emotion. And the way the mind directs the emotion is that it likes to draw from memory, imagination, expectations, creating all kinds of concepts. And this is what causes us a lot of suffering. Because remembering the past, memory, imagining a future, that is about the future, and trying to change the present with expectation, all this brings us suffering. It makes us feel more self-centered. It reinforces the idea of the self. That is why this is so important. right? That we must be aware. Memory, imagination, expectation brings us suffering, and that's where meditation can come in. Meditation can help us realize, withdraw the mind from memory, imagination, expectation. Don't allow that to hurt you, because in your meditation, we don't think about the past, we don't think about the future, we don't want to change the present. We are just there observing moment to moment what is going on by observing our breathing, right? So now it brings us to the third noble truth, that there is an ending to all this, and the end to all this is called nirodha. Nirodha means cessation, the ending, making everything zero, zero rise. You know, accountants do that all the time. Sometimes you zero-rize your calculator, right? So nirodha, you nirodha the calculator, you see. So it is the remainderless, because zero-rize is nothing remainder. Remainderless, fading away, and cessation of this reaction, tanha, emotional reaction, and giving up, relinquishing this emotional reaction, and therefore you become free from it. Freedom from emotional reaction. You no longer depend on emotional reaction for your survival anymore. You use your thinking, right? You use your wholesome conscious thinking, rational thinking, that can help you bring happiness to your life. Emotions can only bring you temporary pleasures, but it will not bring you long-term happiness. Emotions will always end up bringing you more suffering. And the Buddha pointed out, it is the way we think that changes our reality. So the way we think, this is found in the first verse of the Dhammapada. Simply put, thoughts precede our experience. Thoughts predominate. Basically, our thoughts create everything. Thoughts manifest. Manifest means creating our reality. So therefore, if with unwholesome thoughts, evil thoughts, we begin to speak or begin to act with evil intentions, what happens? We're bringing suffering. Suffering follows us, just like the wheel will follow the feet of the ox that is drawing the cart. So here the Buddha is using the ox, because the ox is always suffering. The ox rarely has a good life. Most of the time the ox is busy, carrying things. This is also the reason why when the Buddha traveled around India, he only walked. He never sat in a bullock cart. Never did Buddha want to sit in a bullock cart, because it is bringing suffering to the ox, right? So here the Buddha pointed out that if we were to use unwholesome intentions, ill will, hatred, right, anger and fear, then we will suffer. On the other hand, if we were to reorientate our thinking, change the way we think, change the way we look at things, and begin to think in a more positive way with wholesome thoughts, then thoughts precede experiences, thoughts predominate, they create our reality and manifest our reality. Therefore, if with good thoughts, wholesome thoughts, and we begin to speak or act, happiness will follow us just like the shadow. And this is a wonderful thing. So the shadow never leaves us. So happiness will follow us if we were to think with wholesome thoughts. And this is where meditation comes in again. Meditation helps us to purify our thoughts so that we're able to think more positively. And therefore the practice is the Eightfold Way, the fourth noble truth, talking about the way leading to the ending of suffering. Way leading to the ending of suffering is this Eightfold Way. And I won't go into the Eightfold Way in detail. I will just go through it in a very summarized way, only focus on the meditation part. These are the Eightfold Way. If we would look at another view of it, so this is the other view of the Eightfold Way, where it is around in circle. Now, one quick word about why it is in circle is that when we begin to practice this Eightfold Way, by the time we reach number 8, we now continue back to number 1, and now the next round of number 1 becomes better. So it's actually a continuous improvement program, right? So Buddha was very much into quality improvement in those days. Continuous improvement. That's what it is. That once you've gone through number 8, you now go back to number 1, your number 1 becomes better. So what is number 1 and number 2? Number 1 and number 2 is grouped together. There are 3 groups. So this group is called panya. This is basic wisdom, or rather the basic understanding of the realities. So now you begin learning the Dharma, you begin to have a basic understanding. So that is the first thing you do, samadhi, cultivating right view. You now have the basic understanding of the realities of life. Then the second one, harmonious orientation or right intention. Now you begin to want to do something about it. You want to improve your life. You want to practice Buddhism. Right? This is where we take the 5 precepts. Taking the 5 precepts is really just an intellectual part, and that falls under 1 and 2. Understanding what the 5 precepts means, that is right view. Taking the 5 precepts, that is right intentions. You now want to do good. You want to practice. And when you have done that, the actual practice comes in the next part, in the blue part. And this is sila, morality, cultivating virtuous morality. This is when we begin to practice right speech. We practice right action. We practice right livelihood, or my teacher calls it harmonious lifestyle. Because the word livelihood sometimes means only about your occupation. But actually the Buddha was not just referring to your occupation. The Buddha was actually referring to the way you live your life. So the word livelihood is not very accurate. Lifestyle is more accurate. The way you live your life. Of course, there are certain occupations you should avoid. Occupations that involve hurting or harming other people, other beings. That is an occupation you should avoid. Now, this sila part is about purifying the body. You see? The yellow one, the panya part, is simply laying the foundation. Understanding what is the understanding what are the 5 precepts, taking the 5 precepts, wanting to live according to the 5 precepts. Then the blue part is living according to the 5 precepts. So the blue part is really the actual living and practicing. And finally comes the meditation part. And that is in the green, samadhi. Now samadhi is often translated as concentration. More and more teachers now realize the word samadhi does not really mean concentration. It means tranquility, it means harmony, it means mental equilibrium. So this is the part where we talk about right effort, Sammā Vāyāma, and then lead on, they are progressive. The next thing it progresses on is right mindfulness, Samatha, and finally harmonious equilibrium, and that is Sammā Samadhi. I will only focus on Sammā Vāyāma today, but in a nutshell I'll just run through in summary what these 3 parts mean. The practice of this so-called right effort, Sammā Vāyāma, is made of 4 exercises called Cattari Sammapadana. These are the 4 harmonious exercises which I will explain in detail in a moment. It leads on to the next practice called Satipatthana, which is really often translated as the 4 foundations of mindfulness. But my teacher pointed out it's actually the 4 focuses of introspection. But I'll come to that maybe in one of the future sharing. So this is a later stage of development in your meditation practice. And then finally it takes you to the 3rd stage, which is the completion of it. And that is Sammā Samadhi, cultivation of Sammā Samadhi, because you can practice these 7 steps to awakening, Sattabojjhanga. Sometimes translated as the 7 stages of enlightenment. So there are 7 stages, 7 steps, right? The 7 steps to awakening. So this is the progression that the Buddha pointed out in the Eightfold Way. And not only this was mentioned in the Eightfold Way, the Buddha in many sutras have reiterated using different words. One of the wonderful things about the Buddha is that he is able to teach the same thing using different explanations, different words to different audience. So I'm going to show you some of the other variations where it is really talking about the same thing. Stages to awakening, and this is found in the Anapanasati Sutra. And basically the Buddha said, these are the words of the Buddha, and he says, monks, when mindfulness of breathing or anapanasati is cultivated and developed, it is of great benefit and reward, and it helps to eliminate the 5 hindrances. You see, there are 5 things that prevent us from purifying our mind, and in fact it is getting rid of these 5 things that leads to purification of the mind. So anapanasati, the mindfulness of breathing, will help us. At this point, I just want to very quickly say the word anapanasati really means mindfulness of breathing. Breathing as in the process of inhaling and exhaling. Some people, I'm not going to point to anyone, but some people translate this as mindfulness of breath. And that is incorrect, because my teacher pointed out it is really observing the way you are breathing in and breathing out. Long breath, short breath. Not observing the volume of breath. But there are people who are teaching that, oh, you observe the way the air enters the nose and that volume of breath going through your lungs and going through your abdomen. You can't do that. That is imagination. You can't observe how the air has gone into your lungs. That is pure imagination. What is correct is to observe the way you are breathing, the process of breathing. That's why it's called mindfulness of breathing and not mindfulness of breath. Breath is talking about that volume of air. So here is mindfulness of breathing. So it's very clear, the Buddha pointed out this anapanasati can help you eliminate the 5 hindrances. It is the 5 hindrances, they're called hindrances because they hinder you from succeeding. They prevent you from purifying your mind. Ultimately, the goal, the purpose of meditation is to purify the mind. A lot of people have a different idea. They think, oh, the purpose of meditation is to attain nibbana. If your mind is focused on nibbana, you're not going to be able to do it right. You need to do the basic. The basic is to purify your mind. Only when you are able to purify your mind and perfect that purification are you then ready to experience the next thing, which is that nibbana. Right? I will speak about that at the summary. But basically, this is really the purpose of meditation, is really to purify the mind. Anapanasati, when cultivated and developed, leads to satipatthana, the 4 focuses of introspection, or some people call this the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Just a different translation of the same meaning, satipatthana. I prefer to use the Pali words there. And then the Buddha went on to say, satipatthana, when cultivated and developed, leads to the 7 steps to awakening, or some call this the 7 stages of enlightenment, Satta Bojjhanga. And then Satta Bojjhanga, when cultivated and developed, leads to the fulfillment of the full comprehension, panya. Here, this panya is now referring to the ultimate knowledge, the highest knowledge, full comprehension of the realities of life, and leads you to liberation and freedom from suffering, vimutti. Now, it is very important to realize this is really talking about the whole process of the stages that lead you to nibbana. So therefore, the whole purpose of meditation is not to think about nibbana, but to think about how we can succeed at each step. So in the process of anapanasati, the goal of that is really to try to eliminate the 5 hindrances. And then we move on to the next. Very importantly, the word cultivated and developed. Cultivated simply means you practice. It's not something you think about, but something you actually practice. So cultivate is the practice. The word develop here means when you begin to practice, you begin to benefit from the fruits of your practice. Develop means you are now becoming more developed. So you are actually experiencing the fruits of the practice. So cultivate simply means practice. Develop simply means the fruits. So anapanasati, when you practice and then you benefit from it, you gain the fruits from it, it leads you to satipatthana. And in the same way, satipatthana leads to satta bojjhanga, by practicing and then benefiting from it. Now, here the Buddha presented basically something very similar to the last three parts of the Eightfold Way, but he used a different way of presenting it. I'm going to give you another way that the Buddha presented it in another sutra. This one came from Anapanasati Sutra. The other sutra is in Anguttara Nikaya, Tatiya Sutra, where the Buddha said, where the Buddha was talking about three categories of practitioners. The first are those who have succeeded, the arahants, those who have succeeded. The second are those who are already working very hard at it and in the process of succeeding. So they are already sotapan, one of the four different levels, right? Well, one of the three, like sotapan, sakadagami, and anagami. Because so the first category is the arahants. Then the second category are those who are the sotapan, sakadagami, and the anagami. And the third category are those who are beginning to try, who want to, who have the intention and now starting. So the Buddha was speaking about these three categories. He says, but he can be sure that all those who have been emancipated means the arahants, or who are being emancipated. Being emancipated are the Aryas, the ones who are already sotapan, sakadagami, and anagami, and or who will be emancipated, the ones who are now trying, the beginners, the L plate. So you could say the first category are those who have already started driving on the highway. The second category are those with the P plate. The third category are those with the L plate, right? The L license. So many of us who if we think we have not yet attained the state of sotapan, then we are still on L plate. Nothing wrong with being on the L plate, you're still learning, right? So the Buddha was talking about it. Whether you are the one who has succeeded, or the one who is about to succeed, or the one who is now beginning to try it, he says this is common to all three. Begin with abandoning the five hindrances. These are corruptions of the mind that weaken the wisdom, which means they disturb the mind. So here again, the Buddha pointed out, abandon the five hindrances. Anapanasati is the practice to abandon the five hindrances. And then, when their mind is well established in the four foundations of mindfulness, or four establishments of mindfulness, here, satipatthana. And then, develop correctly the 7 factors of enlightenment, satta bojjhanga. See, again the Buddha repeated the same teaching with different words, meaning exactly the same thing. Begin with anapanasati to abandon the 5 hindrances, cultivate satipatthana, and finally satta bojjhanga, the 7 steps to awakening. And it is in this way that they have been emancipated, the arahants. Are being emancipated, the P plates, and will be emancipated, the L license. Right? So it all boils down to the same thing. First, abandon the 5 hindrances by practicing anapanasati. No shortcuts. Then only you reach a stage where you begin to cultivate wisdom. This last third part is the part where you cultivate panya. Therefore, you cannot bypass. Now, another way of looking at this category here is very simple. The one in pink, Samatha meditation. The one in blue, vipassana meditation. You see? Because the one in blue is the cultivation of wisdom. So you can see, practicing samatha is necessary. This is the way the Buddha described it. Buddha never broke it down and say this is samatha, this is vipassana. Buddha never really taught meditation in that way. He taught anapanasati, satipatthana, and satta bojjhanga. And that's why it is not clear. The Buddha never separated it as samatha and vipassana, although that was mentioned in some other parts. I'll show you later on a couple of slides that I borrowed from Ayasma Agachita. He was very kind to allow me to use them. I'll show you later on the distinction between samatha and vipassana. So abandoning the 5 hindrances is about getting rid of those things that corrupt the mind, disturb us from purifying the mind. What are the 5? The first is kamachanda. Kamachanda is basically means we have desires and wishes for sensual pleasures. Something which coming from our sensation, we like it, we enjoy it, we want more of it, right? The next is this ill will towards something unpleasant. Anger, hatred towards something that is unpleasant. The third one is this laziness and lethargy of not trying hard enough, and sometimes it could lead us to drowsiness when we practice meditation. And the fourth one is the other extreme, where we get too excited and the mind is too disturbed, agitated, restless, anxiety, and so on. And finally the mind is being torn apart, cognitive dissonance, which is often translated as skeptical doubt, but actually the real meaning of vicikicca is not skeptical doubt, it's really cognitive dissonance, the mind being torn apart, disturbing the mind. So these are the 5 things to purify. Now I'm not going to talk about how to do this. I'm not teaching meditation. I suggest that you refer back to your meditation teacher and ask him about Samatha meditation, how to abandon the 5 hindrances, right? But basically the stages to awakening, if we were to plot it in a graphical way, it is like that. Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, leading to satipatthana, which is introspective attention, or the 4 focuses of introspection, leading to satabhujanga, the 7 steps to awakening, leading finally to full comprehension, the ultimate knowledge, panya, and freedom from suffering, vimutti, emancipation, freedom from suffering. And all these can be practiced through this eightfold way that will then lead you to panya and vimutti. In some sutras, the Buddha was not saying there were 10, but the way the Buddha described it, there are 10, right? So that's why it's number 9 is panya, number 10 is vimutti, right? And in some sutras, that's what the Buddha described, 10 stages, not just 8. That's why it confuses a lot of people whether it's 8 or not. There are 8 plus the last 2, which are the fruits of your practice. Now, where is samatha? Where is vipassana? This is samatha. Practicing anapanasati, leading to the first half of satipatthana. Satipatthana is made of 4 foundations, 4 bases, focuses of introspection. The body, the feeling, the emotions, and the way you think, the construction of thinking. The first 2 are not avoidable. It happens to all of us. The body changes. When we see something unpleasant, the body changes, and then there is a certain sensation associated with it. I mean, when you eat something very spicy, definitely you start to sweat a little bit, you start to feel that discomfort of the spiciness. That cannot be avoided. So that is the first 2. That's why anapanasati will help you reduce that. And this whole practice of anapanasati and the first 2 foundations of mindfulness, this is samatha. And satipatthana is overlapping between the 2. And vipassana comes in the second half of satipatthana, which is the part that deals with emotions and then how thoughts are created. Right? So it's actually the chittanupassana and the dhammanupassana, the last 2 parts of satipatthana, then leading to the satabhujanga, and finally to full comprehension and vimutti. That is vipassana. But the Buddha never broke it like this, for a simple reason. Satipatthana is in the middle, overlapping, so it's not possible to break it, and you cannot just break the 4 into 2 different parts. It doesn't make sense. The whole 4 are practiced together, collectively. So therefore, you can simply say this Sammā Vāyāma is associated with samatha, and the final part, samadhi, is associated with vipassana. And then in between is the overlap. Sammā Sati is the overlap. So again, here is another way of presenting it. Now I'm going to give you another way of presenting the same thing. And this, I must thank Ayasma Agachita. I borrowed the next couple of slides from him, the one with the yellow and the blue one. All these slides came from Ayasma Agachita. I must thank him for it. He was very kind. I asked him permission to borrow them. Here, that's where there was a distinction between samatha and vipassana, and coming from that sutra in Anguttara Nikaya, the Tatiya Samadhi Sutra, where the Buddha says that samatha, or rather this was the way Agachita explained it, that samatha is about how to still the chitta. Notice the Buddha was referring to the chitta, not just the mind as a whole. But the translation, the common translation is how to still the mind. But that's not the teaching. The teaching how to still the emotions, the chitta, specifically the chitta. It is not about objects of focus. In samatha, there is no object to focus on. What you are focusing on is not about the breathing. You're really using the breathing to relax the body. Observing the breathing helps you relax the body, bring your mind to a state of stillness. That's really the purpose of observing the breathing, bringing the mind to a state of stillness. That is the purpose of observing. So this is bringing this affective process, the emotional part of your mind, to a state of stillness. That is what samatha is about. Bringing your emotional mind to a state of stillness. And then comes the next one, the vipassana. Vipassana is about the object of focus. And what object to focus? It is focusing on sankhara. Sankhara is mental construction. How the mind creates ideas. How the mind creates thoughts. And this is really to understand how the mind thinks. Not what the mind thinks. How the mind thinks. What the mind thinks is memory, imagination, expectation. How the mind thinks, how it creates thoughts, sankhara, mental construction. So this is really talking about the mental formation of your thoughts, cognitive process. How to regard them, how to investigate them, and how to develop insightful understanding about the way the mind creates thoughts, the mental formation of cognitive process. Now I'm not going to be talking about vipassana anymore, just enough said about vipassana. We'll just take a closer look at samatha itself. And in that sutra, it is talking about the 4 stages. Now before I explain these 4 stages, these 4 stages is talking about how to still the mind. And that is, if we just straight away talk about that, it may be a bit more difficult to comprehend. Let's take a more practical physical example. We talk about the body. If you were running, like your mind is running, your body is now running. How can you transform a running body to perfect stillness, which is lying down? Can you, from running, immediately go into a lying down position and completely still? You can't. Your heart will be beating too fast and so on. What do you need to do? When you're running, the first thing you need to do is stop running. Stand. So in other words, transforming running into standing. Now when you are standing, your entire body weight is still supported by your legs. Your legs is carrying your entire body weight. Now when you are standing, the next level of stillness is to sit down. What happens? When you sit down, you have relieved your legs from carrying the weight of the lower half of the body. Now the upper half of your body is still being carried by the torso. Because when you sit down, your backbone is still supporting the rest of your body weight. So there is still some tension. But at least it is now halved. Better than standing is sitting. Now the final part, after you have sat down already, the last thing you do, you lie down. When you lie down, your entire body weight is no longer being carried by any part of your body. Your body is completely relaxed. So this is thinking of using the body as the example, from running to standing to sitting to lying down. In the same manner, our mind is running. So what do? We need to stand. Bring the mind to a state where it stands. Means it stops running around, ruminating about the past, the present, the future, but basically just focusing on the breath. That is standing. And then as you focus on the breath, the body begins to relax and the mind begins to calm down, stilling. So the mind is settling now. And finally, the mind reaches a state where it is completely peaceful. Peaceful means your emotional mind and your thinking mind are no longer fighting. They are now unified. This is where the word unified comes in. What does unified means? Unifying the mano and the chitta. The mano is your thinking mind, your conscious rational thinking, choosing thoughts. Your chitta is the emotional mind where thoughts are arising all the time, disturbing you. So you are unifying the two, becoming one. So you're beginning to lie down now. The mind is now peacefully lying down, no longer running or having any activity going on. And finally, fully composed. And that is samadhi, bringing the mind to a state of stillness, samadhi. The process of stilling the mind is samatha. The final benefit of stilling the mind is samadhi, which is the mind being perfectly stilled, right? So this is really what samatha is all about. And these slides come from Ayasma Agacitta, where it is talking about stilling the chitta, right? So, in a nutshell, samatha is about accomplishing samadhi, which is stillness of mind, stilling of chitta, so that it becomes settled, calm, tranquil, mental equilibrium, and the mind is unified, samadhi. The unified mind is now perfectly still. And this is a process in jhana called ekagata. Ekagata often is translated as single-pointedness, but it simply means unified, moving in a single direction and culminating in perfect stillness of mind. Whereas vipassana is a cultivation of wisdom, because the word vi means able to discern one from another, discerning, able to see clearly. So that's what vipassana means, distinct seeing. But we're not really going into that. We're going to talk about samadhi. In order to cultivate samadhi, stillness of mind, we need to purify the mind from 5 hindrances, the 5 things that are disturbing us. Okay, good. There are 4 exercises that is needed to be done. And these 4 exercises are called Chattari Samapadana. The first one is called prevention. Now, it's again, we take a physical example. If you want to clean the house, let's say you want to clean your house, what should you do? Should you leave the doors and windows open, trying to sweep the floor while the wind is blowing a lot of dust into the house? No, you can't do that. So if you really want to clean the house, the first thing you need to do is close the door, close the window, so you don't get all the dust being blown in from the outside. So that's the first thing. Closing the windows, closing the doors. And then only you're able to sweep. In the same way, if you want to purify the mind, what's the first thing you need to do? You need to close the sense doors. You need to stop looking at and focusing on objects out there that is disturbing you. And this process is called samvara. The prevention or the withdrawal of attention, right, from external sense objects. So it's preventing unarising, unwholesome states from arising. I'll just go through the summary and then I'll look at it specifically. The next one is, now that you have closed the windows and the doors and you can begin to sweep the house, what do you need to do? You've got to get rid of the dirt. In other words, existing dirt, you've got to get rid of it. So you sweep away all the dirt, and this is the pahana. Get rid of the contamination that is already inside your mind. And this is eliminating unwholesome states that have already arisen. And then what do you do next? Next is, after you have cleaned everything, you need to polish your table, you need to use detergent, right? And now you need to apply something positive, something that can help it stay clean. And therefore, it is cultivating wholesome states. Now you begin to understand good thoughts, real good thoughts that are helpful. The Dharma. You learn more about the Dharma. And after learning all that, if you don't do any more to it, the moment you open the doors and the window, the dirt will come in again. So what do you need to do? You need to maintain, continuously maintain it, so that your house can stay clean, your mind can stay purified. And this is meant to maintain and perfect the wholesome states that have already arisen. That means the good thoughts that you've already cultivated. So there are basically 4 stages here dealing with 2 things: existing, or rather unwholesome thoughts that are coming in all the time or existing, and then good thoughts that need to be cultivated. So the first one is close the doors and begin to sweep the house. So first you close the door, withdrawal, samvara, prevent the arising of unarising unwholesome states, which means you prevent any new unwholesome thoughts from arising by closing the sense doors. Withdraw your attention from what you see, hear, smell, taste and touch. It doesn't mean close your eyes. It means you withdraw your attention. A lot of people think about closing sense door means closing your eyes. Well, it's like driving. Can you drive with your eyes closed? Oh no. You come to the traffic light, you stop at the red light. Let's say we keep this simple. Example of a guy, a male, drive up to the traffic light and he stops there. And then this beautiful, voluptuous lady wearing very thin clothing walk by in front of you, bouncing. So if the young man stares and goes, then he is contaminating the mind. Samvara simply means if you notice something unwholesome coming, just ignore it. Not close your eyes, just ignore it. Don't pay attention to it. Focus on something else. Sometimes look at the scenery a bit. But of course, for many guys, it's not so easy to do. Somebody walking right in front, voluptuous lady bouncing. Of course, you get very distracted. So this is really withdrawing your attention. Not to pay attention. Doesn't mean close your eyes, but closing the eyes can be the beginning. That's why in meditation, we start off with closing the eyes. But when you are able to practice it, you begin to practice another meditation. I don't know if you learn it, but the Burmese are very good at it. It's called open awareness. With eyes open, 45 degrees downwards, eyes are open, but not focused on anything. And that is this, withdrawing. He's very good at this. Yes, this is the practice of samvara. Being able to keep the eyes open and yet not distracted or disturbed. Right? It's like the four monkeys. Right? See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, do no evil. Simple as that. Withdrawing your attention from all the evil distractions, or rather unwholesome distractions. So that's the first exercise. The second exercise is pahana. This is abandonment. Inside us, we already have unwholesome states. What arises then? Memory, imagination, expectation. Learn to let it go. Because even when you try to sit there and meditate, you close your eyes, you no longer, in other words, you're practicing samvara, pahana also arises. Pahana is your memory coming up. Imagine, in the middle of meditation, this happens to a lot of us. Yesterday, my boss is scolded me. These kind of thoughts arise. And then, tomorrow I have to hand in this assignment. I'm meditating now. Your mind is disturbed by memory, imagination, expectations arising. And this is where pahana comes in. Right? Abandon unwholesome states that are already arising inside us. They arise, letting it go. Let go your attention. Letting go of memory, imagination, expectations that arouse your emotions. Right? So this is really pahana. And this is the second stage of purification. Then after this, you are now firstly preventing any new evil thoughts entering your mind. You are now also getting rid of the existing evil thoughts. What should you do next? Start to imbue your mind with good thoughts. And that's where the third part comes in. This is called bhavana. Some of you will notice this word. Bhavana is often translated as meditation. But here it really means cultivation. Cultivation of good thoughts. Cultivate wholesome states that are not yet arisen by selective thinking. Choosing thoughts that are wholesome and good, that can help you. Thoughts of what? Metta. Thoughts of karuna. Right? Thoughts of kindness. Thoughts of compassion. Thinking of how you can do good to this world. How you can help other people. This will free you from thinking about yourself. The more you think about the past, the present, the future, the more your mind is trapped into this delusion of self-centered existence. And now your mind is starting to cultivate good thoughts. Thoughts of metta. And this is where metta meditation comes in. And finally, the fourth part is anurakana, which is maintenance. And this basically means to maintain and to perfect the wholesome states that have not yet, maintain and perfect the wholesome states that already arisen in you, the good thoughts. In other words, you keep cultivating the good thoughts by remembering it, reminding yourself of it, continuously maintaining attention and awareness of preventing and eliminating the unwholesome thoughts. So this is really how you can transform the learning, the practice that you have into your everyday life. And this is where you now move on to Satipatthana. So in other words, if you're able to do this, you are now perfectly equipped to do Satipatthana and perfect Satipatthana. If you're not able to do these 4 steps, you can never practice Satipatthana, because as you're meditating there, your memory will remind you of something unpleasant and then you get disturbed. You will never be able to practice mindfulness. So these are the 4 foundations that can help you, foundational practice. And this is really the topic of today's sharing. So basically, in summary, when we practice meditation, even as L-plate, even if we are just beginning to learn it, we will gain these benefits. All of you will know that. If you begin to practice meditation, what happens? When you start to meditate, the heart rate will slow down. Your breathing will become natural, and then it will improve blood circulation, and your blood pressure will come down a little bit, and it will enhance your immune system as you sit there and you meditate. It will calm your anger, fear, anxiety, because all that is coming to a rest, and you no longer feel depressed if you're able to do this successfully. Up to this point, anybody can benefit from there. Simply trying to meditate, you can benefit like that. But if you have a good teacher, and a good teacher now teaches you a more advanced steps, then you begin to learn how to abandon emotional excitement, abandoning tanha. Right? You no longer have this emotional reaction. You're able to tame your lust, hatred, and delusion. Your lobha, dosa, and moha can be purified, and you are able to now practice Satipatthana, cultivate introspection, Satipatthana, and then you're able to develop this cognitive consonance. The mind is now becoming one. You will start to experience jhana, and when you finally experience jhana, the mind becomes attain a state of equilibrium. Now you're experiencing stillness of the mind, jhana, and then you're able to move on to the next stage of your practice, vipassana. So you need to practice and perfect your samatha before you move on to vipassana. But you know, I'm not criticizing anyone. It's a very common human desire. A lot of people want to straight away learn the higher thing. Straight away they want to learn vipassana. I can say this to you in simple words. My teacher will also say the same to you. If you do not learn how to practice samatha properly, you have no chance of succeeding in practicing vipassana. Simply put, because this is the progress. This is the way the Buddha has already taught. You have to go in that stages: anapanasati, Satipatthana, then only Satabhujanga, which is vipassana. And then it can lead you to attain full comprehension and vimutti, liberation, emancipation from your suffering. So I hope you now understand. Right? So you can download this presentation from tiny.cc Harmonious Exercises. Right? Please take a snapshot if you want, and you can email to me. You have any questions about what I have presented today, and you can also contact me through Facebook. You can see a lot of things that I'm posting, so you can download that. Any questions, please, from the floor? Anyone?